not
April.
not April. Okay, so that is your chronological age. That's only one measure of age. Then we have what we call the biological age,
Mm-hmm.
which is how old is your body. You know, these days Cerelac and all the nice foods that these days you have to eat. So these days you can see somebody who's 12 years old and futu, the body is all
Yes.
over. You know, so that is the biological age. How old is your body? Okay, what in sports sometimes we talk about football age. So you know, sometimes you look at somebody, there's that mismatch. Then we also have what we call the mental age. And
Okay.
mental age is how old is your mind? In other words, how old, at what age is your mind functioning? Um, you can have a situation where you can meet, let's say, a 16-year-old child,
Yeah.
and when they start talking, you can see that there's so much wisdom
Yes.
coming from them that you think that the person is even 40 or something. They'll tell you philosophies of life and all that. So you realize that even though biologically, or if you like chronologically, the person is 16, their mind is way up there.
Yeah.
So when we are talking about IQ is simply calculated as your mental age over your chronological age times 100. Let me simplify that. So if you have a child who's 12 years old, chronologically,
Yeah.
that's they are 12 years old, and they are in class 6, the average age of the average class 6 child, okay, they are supposed to be in class 6. So that means that they have a mental age of 12.
Yeah.
So mental age is 12, chronological age is 12 times 100, the IQ is 100, which is average.
Okay.
So that is it. But average age is not fixed, as in with a fixed score of 100. Okay, we have to make room for what the statisticians, I know, like I said, we are in school, so forgive me small if I sound technical. We have to make room for what the statisticians call standard deviation. Not everybody is going to have the raw score of 100. Some people have a little bit above, some people have a little bit below. So we make room for a standard deviation of 15. 15 below 100 or 15 above 100.
Okay.
So if a child has an IQ of say 110, it's still average IQ. Again, so forgive me, like I said, we're in class, Kakra. You made the mistake of bringing a teacher, so I'll teach. Um, so if you have, let's say, a child who's in you have a 12-year-old child, chronological age 12, and he's in JSS,
Yeah.
okay, that means that he has a mental age of 13. Oh, does that mean that the child is super smart? Simple, let's do a calculation. Mental age 13 over chronological age 12 times 100 should tell us the average IQ of the child. So 13 over 12 times 100. If you do the calculation, you're going to get somewhere 108.3 or something. Am I right? Okay, yeah. So 108.3, it's average. The child still ranges between the score of 85 to 115. So
Okay.
that is average intelligence. You may have a few children who are going to rank what we call above average. Those are the super smart ones. IQ 115 to roughly 130. So again, if you have a child who's, let's say, 12 years old and is in GHS 3, okay, that means he has a mental age of, let's say, because an average GSS 3 child is what, 15 years?
15.
Okay, so he has an average age of, let's say, mental age of 15 and a chronological age of 12, right?
Yeah.
So if you do the calculation, 15 over 12 times 100 should give you somewhere 125. Now that child is what we call above average, while being super smart, but he's not too much.
Okay.
You understand? Then we have what we call the gifted or the geniuses. Those guys, 130, 145 going. What you can have, and we do have a few of them. I think one of the smartest guys alive today, at the age of 19, actually had 2 PhDs. Sorry, at the age of 15, actually had 2 PhDs. Now the average age to have a PhD is 28, plus give and take another 4 years, 32. Okay? So what that means, if you have a 16 or a 15-year-old child walking around with 2 PhDs, you now do the calculation and then you see what we're talking about.
Okay.
So when we are talking about average, so you have those on one extreme, the super smart ones, the geniuses, the gifted ones, the above average, they are there. Then you have those who are below average, they are the mentally retarded.
Okay.
And it's important that we understand some of these things because, especially in our part of the world, parents tend to compare their children a lot.
Yeah.
I have a child who is 8 years old and he is still in class 2. By now, I expected him to be in class 4. So does that mean my child is retarded or he's below average? When you start doing these calculations, you realize that, well, your child is not as bad as you think you are. And this, when you know some of these calculations, it helps to put it helps to put you at rest as a parent.
Okay.
So when you're talking about average IQ, it is when you have that score between 85 to 115. Now, if you have below 85, in fact 70 to 85, okay, then you are what we call below average.
Okay.
Okay, so let's do the calculation again. If you have a 12-year-old child, this 12-year-old child, you would expect him to be in class 6.
Yes.
But if your 12-year-old child is in, let's say, class 4, okay, that means that we'll give him probably a mental age of 10. Okay, is the child mentally retarded? Let's do the math. 10 over 12 times 100. You're going to find the child somewhere in the score of 60 something. All right, am I right? Yeah, 60 something. Then we have cause to worry.
Okay.
You understand? Then we may start getting worried a little. And so this is it. So if the one with mental retardation, once the individual has a score of below 70, then it's time for us to start getting worried.
Okay.
So on average, an IQ score of below 70 tends to be considered that.
Mental. Okay, please, you mentioned that if a child is, say, 12 years and probably is in junior high school 3, they could probably be average, they could have an average IQ. What if the child went to school early? That accounted for them being in a particular class higher than the normal level. Is it just the mere fact that he is in a higher class or maybe in an upper class, comparing him to his colleagues, does that give any indication of his IQ? Maybe he is there, but he's not really doing well.
Very well. That's a very good question. That's a very good question because generally a lot of parents try to rush their children through the school system thinking that they are trying to help them. And that is actually one of the weaknesses. That is one of the biggest weaknesses with the whole concept of IQ. So in fact, in recent times, a lot of psychologists and academics are now beginning to question the concept of IQ, especially in using it to measure people's intelligence. Because like you said, what if the child went to school very early? So, and this is, it actually happens a lot.
Yes.
You know, people expect that instead of the child starting class 1 when they are 6 years old, they actually start class 1 when they are 5 years old. Okay, and so it's like they are 1 year ahead, and then you are trying to rush the child through. Now, what and like you said, what may happen then is, yes, the child may go through the school system quite quickly, but that doesn't necessarily mean that the child is a super shark or they are significantly that smart. But then again, let's be mindful of the fact that IQ scores are not absolutes.
Okay.
They are ranges. Okay, so but even between the ranges, if they jump you by a class or two, typically you won't stand out so much. But those kids who may generally tend to stand out will be those kids who probably have been jumped by 3 or 4 batches, and that can create and then it may create a problem, especially when the child has not acquired certain skills, especially at the lower levels. I'm a lecturer, so let me say this. One of the things we realize is that generally parents, especially in the early years, like to rush their children to the early years, class 1, class 2, class 3. And for topics like mathematics in particular, those years are the foundation years. So if the child doesn't get a grip of some of these basic mathematical concepts, LCM, HCF, the concept of numerators, denominators, mixed fractions, and all of those things, they may pass the exam and rush through all right. But because they haven't fully acquired the skill set, then they become like Achilles' heels. They dog the child for the rest of their academic life. And even though the children may be doing decently well in school, they won't really grasp the concepts, you know. But yes, it's possible. So just because a child has jumped a year or two doesn't mean that the child is super smart. Okay? And the other thing also is, even within this calculation, we should also be mindful of the role of the environment. It is unfair, for instance, to compare an urban child to a rural child. A child living in Tema, okay, or Accra, you live in a house where, on average, between mommy and daddy, they share at least 3 mobile phones. There is a television. The radio has got in excess of 100 different radio stations. There's the internet. And so what that means is that a child growing up in Accra, Tema, already has a lot of information rushing at them. Compare it to a child in growing up in Obosumasi number 13, somewhere. You understand, okay? They don't have the same type of information that they have. And so if you bring such a child from that area and bring him to Accra, okay, you realize that you can have, let's say, a 12-year-old child, and yet, because they are not, for instance, able to function well in English, their basic concept of mathematics, etc., is not that well. You may say, okay, let that child start from class 3 instead of class 6 where they were in primary school. Does that mean that that child is retarded? No.
Okay.
You understand? But the environment that they are coming from also played a key role. So when we are looking at these things, it's a very complex thing. You need to be conscious of the environment that the child is growing up in, what type of things the child has exposure to. The more exposure the child has, the more they know. Forgive this example. It's like comparing, and people will not like this, a European child to a Ghanaian child. See, a child being raised in Switzerland is already starting with 3 languages because they speak 3: French, German, and I've forgotten, Italian. They speak 3 languages. Okay, you in Ghana, you speak English. You understand? So if you try to make that comparison, you realize that, and it doesn't mean that the Ghanaian child is less smart. It simply means that that environment gives them different things.
Okay.
Yes.
Thank you very much. So my next question is, how is a diagnosis carried out aside the intellectual IQ, average IQ calculation?
The diagnosis is normally carried out by trained psychologists, and at the depending on the type of person you go to see, normally if the school or the parent suspects that the child is mentally retarded or is intellectually impaired, you have to go and see a psychologist. The psychologist typically will have a lot of instruments at their disposal that they use. We have a lot of assessment tools for that. There are several. I can mention just a few of them. I think one of the most common is something called the Weissler Aptitude Intelligence Scale. In fact, for children, that we call the Weissler Aptitude Intelligence Scale for children. We have another one called the Kaufman's ABC, Kaufman's Aptitude Battery for children. We have different types of psychological tests, and in trying to diagnose or trying to assess a child for intellectual impairment, there are several things you look at, not just the academic performance. You even look at things like what we call visual motor skills, recollection. So I can give you a series of numbers. Let's say 5, 7, 11, 15, and 19. And then we have a conversation. And then 5 minutes later, I'll ask you, what were the numbers I asked you to keep in mind? You know, these are, so it's complex. It's not a simple thing. But that's why you have psychologists around to do that. We have different skills. You can ask a child, for instance, to from the number 6, mention every 7th letter. Okay, and an average 9-year-old, okay, 6, 13, 19, 26, 33, 40, 47, 54, 61, 68. They tell us things. So depending on the psychologist you go and see and what the issues are, so that is one aspect we look at. We also look at, like I said, we look at recollection. We look at hand-to-eye, we call visual motor coordination. So, for instance, how well you can copy letters. I don't know if we still do these things, but when we were in primary school, one of the things that we used to do a lot were the copy books. You know, where they buy books and then you have a picture of a cat and you're asked to copy the cat and all those. They were things that were meant to develop our intellectual skills.
Okay.
You have the tracers and all that.
Yes.
You know, the books for tracing. All of those things are very, very important. Okay, and we do use them in assessing intellect. Then we're also going to ask for. We also do a background. We ask questions about your past. Okay. And in fact, maybe in order to understand that better, maybe I think what we should have done is we should have spoken about some of the factors that cause retardation, because we're going to be interested in things like your past, developmental milestones. And so normally we like to meet the parents or who was with the child when they were growing up. How old were you when you began to walk? How old were you when you took your first steps? How old were you when you made your first, you said your first word? Okay. All of those things. When mommy was pregnant for you, what type of sicknesses did she have? What kind of medications did she take? Because all of these things are factors that play a key role in influencing a child's intellectual ability. So, yes, we ask all of those questions. Growing up, what type of sicknesses, for example, did you have? Because there are some illnesses, for example, once a child has them, and even when they recover, generally speaking, they can have a lasting impact on the child's intellectual development. Sicknesses, like thankfully they are not so common, but hydrocephalus, cerebral meningitis, and a few others. The malarias for very, very young children. These are some illnesses that generally we should be scared of. Yeah, so we're going to probe and find out about all of these things, because they are indicative of how a child's mind developed.
Okay.
And you'll also notice that in talking about intellectual disabilities, I'm constantly talking about children.
I was going to ask you.
You're going to ask that, yes, because normally intellectual disability is diagnosed in children, not adults.
Okay.
Okay, so you can't be 34 before we diagnose you for the first time as being mentally retarded. No, they are disorders that we normally diagnose in infancy or adolescence, in childhood. Sorry.
Okay.
Yeah.
Could there be an instance where an adult probably has mental retardation?
If an adult has mental retardation, then it was there when they were children. So in that case, it's not mental. It's not an adult retardation. If you have a situation where, as an adult, as a child growing up, you never had any mental retardation, you were living your life quite well, went to school, socialized properly, and everything. Then let's say late into your adulthood, something happens, and then as a result of that, you are having an illness. That's not mental retardation. That can be some other illness. Maybe you've had an accident which may have caused some neurological impairments. You know, sometimes certain types of accidents may lead to brain damage, but that is not mental retardation. Okay. We also have certain sicknesses which, as you grow, you may likely have. I think sicknesses that normally come with forgetfulness, especially in the case of adults. I think one of the most common, at least, is Alzheimer's. Okay, which normally when a person is when you are quite advanced in years, you know, chronic forgetfulness. Okay, your own child. One day you wake up and you see the child and you ask, "Who are you?" All right, and generally they don't remember who you are. Yes, that is not mental retardation. Mental retardation is an illness diagnosed in children.
Can it be referred to as a disability?
Yes, intellectual. That's why we call it intellectual disability. It is a disability, because once you are mentally retarded, what it does is that, in a way, you are, how do I put it? You are unable to perform certain key tasks
Okay.
with the proficiency that you are supposed to.
Okay.
Okay, so yes, it's a disability, but the intensity of the disability, is dependent on the level of retardation.
Okay.
Okay, so yes, it's a disability, but how serious is it is actually dependent on the level of retardation that the child or the individual is suffering from. With some, it's not that intense, okay, but with others, it is seriously debilitating. It seriously cripples them down.
Okay.
Yeah, and we have four main levels, at least generally speaking. We have four levels of intensity, or four levels of disability. We have what we call the mild, we have the moderate, we have the severe, and we have the profound.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you. Okay, please, what do you look out for if you think someone has mental retardation? If you think your child has mental retardation, will you just concentrate on the IQ, or there are other signs they should? Can they have other disabilities in addition to the mental disability?
Okay, let me give this warning. First and foremost. No parent should sit at home and assess their child and come to the conclusion that their child is retarded.
Okay.
Let me give that warning first and foremost. If you suspect that you feel your child has a problem, go to the appropriate professional. First point of call, you can go see a doctor. If the doctor suspects that there is a problem, they should be able to refer you to an appropriate person. Why am I saying this? Because mental retardation is only one of a number of different disabilities that children may have. Okay. For instance, there are some children, for instance, who are late talkers. Okay, but doesn't mean that they are mentally retarded.
Okay.
You understand? There are some children who are late talkers. Doesn't mean that they are mentally retarded. There are some children who may put up certain funny behaviors. It doesn't mean that they are mentally retarded. So on the spectrum of, in fact, we have, when you look at the way mental illnesses are generally assessed, we have different ways of categorizing them. If you like, the Bible of psychologists is referred to as the DSM, the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, and in there you have a wide variety of mental illnesses. Okay, and we have what we call disorders diagnosed in infancy, childhood, and adolescence. Mental retardation is just one. Okay, we have, for instance, what we call communicative disorders and affective disorders. Okay, where there are some children, for instance, they may be okay, but when you ask them questions, they don't talk to you. Okay, or you can have a child who never smiles. Okay, and you might end up thinking, okay, so no. Or they may sometimes be unable to express themselves socially. So you can have a child, for instance, when you are talking to the child, when the child is talking to you, realize that they start coming to you. Yes, forgive me, but typically, like how you and I are having a conversation. No, they'll start walking towards you, and then they are in front of you like that. What is your name? How old are you? Where do you attend school? Are you a girl? What? How old are you? And it's like they are in your face. And that is not mental retardation. That is a different type of illness.
Wow.
You understand? So we shouldn't be in a hurry to label our children.
Okay.
You understand? So we shouldn't be in a hurry to label our children. So the first thing, if you feel that you have a problem with your child, go to a professional. Let's do the proper assessment. And the earlier the assessment is done, the earlier the child can be helped. Okay? So no, it's not every problem that is, especially with children, that is automatically mental. And then we also have the late developers, which a lot of people tend to ignore. Some children are not retarded or anything. They're just a little bit late. They tend to keep to themselves. Okay?
Are they the ones referred to as slow learners?
Yes. They are the ones, yes and no. Generally, when you are talking about slow learners, they are those kids who, in the early years in school, they don't seem to be picking up. They are like latent learners. When you ask them a question, it's like, I don't understand. For the first few years in school, then all of a sudden, like when they enter secondary school, they just explode, and it's like everything is there. What was happening? Those are the late developers. So it's like in the early years, they were in a stage of latent learning. It was like the things were entering their head, but they were not expressing themselves. But when it is time for them to start, you realize that they move ahead of everybody else. Yes. And then generally speaking, you also have the slow learners who generally, if you like, throughout their lives, they will be able to operate all right, but they may not even be able to pick up with the same speed and intensity as everybody else. The other thing also that we must realize is that even as children, as students, if you like, learning, and again, this is one area a lot of parents tend to ignore. We don't all learn in the same way.
Yes.
Okay, we don't all learn in the same way. We have, and maybe one of these days we may have to spend time to look at different types of learners. Okay, we have what we call verbal learn. We have verbal learners. We have visual learners. We have active learners. We have reflective learners. So, for instance, in the classroom, you realize that there are some children who are very, very noisy. Okay, you ask, you're going to say a point now. Some students will just actively try to oppose the teacher for opposing sake. And as a teacher, if you're not careful, you think that the child is troublesome. No, but in the process of being that, those are the active learners. In the process of opposing, that is how they assimilate.
Okay.
You see?
Yes.
Then there are those children, for example, as you are talking, they keep quiet. And then everything has to go into their head. After everything has gone into their head, then later on they go and sit down, and then they go through everything again. And with them, when they grab it, that is it. There are some students, no matter how much you talk, until you show them a video, it won't enter their heads. You see it?
Yes.
Okay? There are some type of students, no matter how well you write, until you talk to them, it won't enter.
Okay.
So everybody, we have different types of learning strategies, and that is why, again, if you're a student, you need to know what type of learning strategy works for you. So if you go and you adopt somebody's learning strategy, it might not work for you. Let me share my personal example. For instance, I cannot sit down for 2 hours. I don't know how to do it. Forget. 30 minutes, I'm up. But within that intensive 30 minutes, I'm okay. But I am active. So after 30 minutes, if you ask me any question, the more I say it, the more it sticks. I don't need multiple reading. But I have a brother who can sit down literally 6 hours round the clock.
Wow.
6 hours. And he doesn't talk. But when it sticks, forget.
That's wonderful.
So we are different type of learners, and so everybody needs to know, if you're a student, until you know what type of learner you are, you're going to be wearing somebody's robe.
Yes.
And then you'll be struggling. That is why sometimes, but I sit and I study with the best guys in class and I'm not getting the best results. Maybe that is not your learning strategy.
Yes.
There are some people, for instance, believe it or not, who have no business even reading their notes. I'll tell you what, there are some people who actually do better when they read other people's notes. So when he writes his own notes, it doesn't make sense to him. But he picks yours. He reads it. Oh, okay. He picks another person's own. He reads it. Oh, okay. He picks a third person, and he's fine.
Wow.
You see? So you got to know yours. If you don't know yours, you'll be in the class and you'll be struggling.
Interesting.
Yes.
Okay, so over the years, I think many people think mental retardation is mental illness. So anytime you hear mental retardation, people are picturing the mad people on the street, those who look like they have psychological problems that are showing on them physically. Is there any relation?
Okay. What you call the mad people on the streets walking around, they are what you generally refer to as schizophrenics. Okay, that's a whole different area. So, forgive me, touch wood, the naked, wearing rags, walking around, talking to themselves, seeing things that don't exist. They are suffering from a particular mental illness called, most of them are suffering from something called schizophrenia.
Okay.
Okay. And that is a mental illness. Mental retardation is also an illness. Okay. But it can be managed. If you'll allow me, let me just touch on the different types of mental retardation. So
Okay.
I think maybe it will help you. Okay. Not everybody who is mentally retarded, it doesn't always show on the face.
Okay.
Okay. So for instance, earlier on, I spoke about the levels of retardation. I think the
Yes.
first one I identified for you was the mild. Mildly retarded individuals generally tend to have an IQ score of between 55 to 70.
Okay.
Now, generally, they may even be in class with you and you will not know.
Mm-hmm.
They are as handsome as you are. They are as beautiful as you are, gorgeously dressed. They even talk well.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, but what generally tends to give them away is that during the early years of school, they may be able to move. So class 6, they are okay. Class 1, class 1, class 2, class 2. But from, let's say, class 3, class 4, then you now begin to see them start struggling.
Mm-hmm.
Okay?
Yeah.
You now begin to see them start struggling. So let's say class 4, class 5, they repeat once or twice. Class 6, they repeat once. GHS 1, another repeat. Then you realize that they are struggling. Okay? So they struggle to pass the BEC. As for WASI, the SSS, the Charlie, nightmare from day one. Now, the defining hallmark of what we call the mildly retarded is referred to them as educable.
Okay.
What that means is that these individuals, they can go to school.
Okay.
All right, they can learn up to a certain level, but beyond that level, if they decide to go academic, they struggle.
Wow.
You understand? So individuals who are mildly retarded, they can grow up with proper, they can take care of themselves, they can look good and all that, but advanced intellectual jobs can be a challenge for them.
Mm-hmm.
So for instance, if you give them contracts for them to do jobs that demand advanced calculations, they will struggle. Big contracts, they will struggle. But generally speaking, they can work hard, they can take care of themselves, they can get jobs, jobs that require, minimum levels. Because I don't want to offend anyone, so I'm not going to start mentioning any particular jobs, but they can pick jobs where they can get paid at the end of the month.
Mm-hmm.
They can rent their place, they can pay their bills, so long as the bills are not too complicated. But if you ask them to start calculating their tax revenue and everything, Charlie, you are bringing trouble.
Wow.
You understand? Those are the mildly retarded. Okay, then we have what we call moderate. Moderate may be able to go to school up to a certain level. Let's say roughly class 4. They can also be taught to take care of themselves.
Okay.
Okay, so if they are with you in the house, up to beyond a certain point, let's say by class 3, class 4, if you want them to go beyond that, it'll be a problem. Okay, but they can be taught, they can be trained in the house, so we refer to them as trainable. They can be trained to take care of themselves, basic hygiene. They should know that early, when they wake up in the morning, they have to take their bath, they have to tidy their room, they have to brush their teeth, and they can be in the house. They can hang around the house and then do certain chores.
Okay.
So if somebody comes looking for mommy and daddy, mommy is not around, should I take a message? Okay, fine. Don't expect them to write. They'll give you the pen and paper, you write the message and they'll put it down. When mommy and daddy comes, they'll give it to you.
Okay.
So basically, they can take care of themselves, they can do certain basic tasks in the house, but as to whether they cannot live alone as fully functioning, self-sufficient individuals. You understand? But that doesn't mean we throw them away. Within the family setup, they also have their use, okay? And they can be good to have around, They are not that bad. Now, where things start getting really critical are the last two.
Okay.
The severe and the profound. Severely retarded ones may never be able to speak. We've seen a few of them walking around, and I know everybody has seen one or two. These ones, when they wake up in the morning, if you are their caregiver, you have to bath them. You have to brush their teeth and then dress them up. They can't talk, so you let them out. They'll probably go out, they'll roam, and then at the end of the day, they come back when they are hungry. And when they're hungry, they can't talk. Like I said, they haven't developed speech. So sometimes you realize when we're having social events like funerals and other things, you realize that some of them will come and stand there. When the music is playing, they'll dance and dance and dance and dance and dance, and then they can't talk. Then they go away. If you offend them, they struggle to talk. When they get offended, they can throw things at you and all that, but they can't talk, and they can't take care of themselves. As in, they can't bath themselves. They can't go fending for food or anything. Okay, so when you bath them, at the end of the day, you have to go and find them and bring them home and take care of them, etc. Okay, and generally they make up about 5% or less. In fact, let's say 3 to 4% of the total population of individuals with retardation. But the most intense are the profound. Profoundly retarded, most of them don't grow into even their teens, because with them, generally speaking, most of the time they come with neurological, or if you like, congenital birth defects. So right from day one, from the minute they are born, for most of them, they will not be able to talk, they will not be able to walk. In terms of physiological development, they will only be able to give you some of the most basic facial gestures. So even when it comes to basic expression, they can't do it. All right, so you can have, let's say, a 7-year-old profoundly retarded child, and if you're playing music, they just look at you like that. They can't take care of themselves. Literally, you have to do everything for them. You have to feed them, you have to bath them, you have to dress them. If they're feeling cold, they'll just stay in the cold and probably they die of it. Yeah, and so in the case of the profoundly retarded, and thankfully they form a very small population, but most of them, they demand literally 24 hours of care. Like I said, they can't do anything. They can't walk, they can't talk, they can't even cry, they can't do anything. So most of them generally a little bit of neglect, and then they just die off. So yeah, so these are the 4 types. So you realize that the most common forms of retardation we'll find, generally speaking, are all around us. The mild and the moderate, who generally speaking are able to operate within the society.
Okay, Prof. So children with autism and their profound mentally retarded kids, do they have anything in common? Are they the same, or there are differences?
Very good question. Let me emphasize this. Children with autism are not retarded.
Okay.
It's one of the most common misimpressions that people have. And maybe one of these days, I hope, if God gives us the grace, we may have to spend time to talk about autism alone. Children with autism are not retarded. I can't emphasize this strongly enough. Now, autism is, if you like, mind blindness.
Okay.
That's the best way I can describe it. Autism is mind blindness. When a person is autistic, what it means is that their mind is selective. Okay, so within the autism spectrum within the autism spectrum, again, just like retardation, we have different levels of intensity. But at the heart of autism is what we call mind blindness. A child who's autistic, this is the way their mind works. Their mind focuses on just one piece of sensory information at a time. Yanko school kakra. Let's go to school again. You have 5 senses. Sense of sight, sense of taste, sense of smell, sense of hearing, sense of touch. Okay?
Yeah.
Now, a child who's autistic cannot take in too much information simultaneously.
Okay.
So, for instance, here you and I, we are talking. If as we're having a conversation, let's say if I'm autistic, the minute a third party comes in and they start saying, oh, hey, talking to maybe, oh, hi, Charlie, how's everything doing? You realize that straight away, they close their ears like this, and then they close their eyes, and then they get jittery. Why? Because they are overwhelmed by the information that they are receiving. In other words, the mind of the person with autism is such that they tend to take in only one piece of information at a time. So if they are listening to you, it's only you. He can't be listening to you and be listening to another person, listening to another person. No, that's too much information. One, if the information is intense, it also gets them off.
Okay.
You understand? And when they get into one particular type of information, when they get engaged with one type of sensory information, okay, they focus on that until they are okay. So maybe he loves your doorknob. He goes and stands by the door, and then he stays there, 1, 2, 3, and you'll be doing that for like a whole hour, just changing the door. When you try to pull him away from the door, he starts screaming and shouting. Why? Because he hasn't yet received enough sensory stimulation from the door. Or let's say my pen and the pad. 1, it fell. 2, it fell. Oh, okay. They'll keep on doing it again and again and again and again and again and again and again. That is the autistic person, but they are not retarded. Why? Because even as you are talking to them, they are assimilating the information. But what happens is that they choose what they want to assimilate at any given point in time. So it's like their mind operates with a different set of rules. You can have a child who is autistic and you go to him, oh, Kwesi, where are my socks? He knows where it is, but he won't mind you at that point in time. You look for your socks and look and look and look. You go to work, not finding your socks. Then in the evening when you come back, he'll just come and stand at you. He'll just come and stand, look at you and say, under your bed. And then he'll go away. Under your bed. And say, under my bed, what? That's all he needs to say.
Okay, I get it.
You see it?
Yeah.
So with the autistic, their mind operates very different. So you go and look under your bed, then you find your socks. But in the morning when you asked him, he didn't tell you. You understand? Because at that particular time, his mind was elsewhere. So he shelved your question because at that particular time, it wasn't his priority.
Interesting.
You see how they are?
Yeah.
But that's the autistic person. And we have a type of autistic, and they tend to be overdeveloped in one particular area. We have what we call the savant syndrome. And with the savants, what can happen is that sometimes they may have an overdeveloped competence in one particular area. So much so that they do it better than anybody else. So for example, he can read a book once, and when he reads the book, he can recite everything for you from head to toe. So for instance, you ask him, so have you ever been to Ghana before? Oh, Ghana, a country in West Africa, location, geographical location, latitude so and so, longitude so and so, bordered to the west by Ivory Coast, bordered to the east by Togo, up north is Burkina Faso, down south is... What is he doing? He's reciting the book that he read for you, which is in his head. And that is what they do. So it's like chew and pop, but they do it like nobody's business. Another savant may be so good in, let's say, mathematics. And so, they speak their own language. And that's what makes it difficult. If you can't speak their language, you may struggle. So maybe you are referred to one, and the person looks at you, and then they say 7. Okay, that's all they say, 7. And then you say 49. Then he says 343. Then you say 2401. Then he says 16807. Then you say 117649. Do you know what we are doing?
Multiplying the numbers.
That's right. And if you can't speak his language, he's not your friend.
I see.
So theirs is a very different mind.
Okay. Thank you very much, Prof. We would like to go on a quick break and then we'll be right back.
Okay.
And I made the scene with it, redeemed and perfect without sin. Yes, we are anointed and inspired by our God. The original life, the original life, the original.
A.m. to 12:30 p.m., where we bring to you the undiluted, unadulterated Word of God. You can also contact us on the numbers being displayed on your screen for questions and inquiries. Shalom and stay blessed. Shalom. This is the Original Word Ministry. We believe in the original Bible doctrines. We believe in the true apostolic teachings. We believe in preaching the unadulterated Word of God to restore the bride to the original faith of the apostles. Remember, the Bible says, "My house shall be called the house of prayer." Come and pray your problems away. Remember, prayer breaks every chain. It opens the windows of heavens. Prayer brings deliverance and healing to the soul. Worship with us at the Original Word Ministry, opposite the Fountainhead University College, Community 12, Tema. Visit us every Tuesdays, Wednesdays, and Fridays at 6 p.m. with healing and deliverance service on Fridays at 10 a.m. We invite you to our Sunday service from 8 a.m. to 12:30 p.m., where we bring to you the undiluted, unadulterated Word of God. You can also contact us on the numbers being displayed on your screen for questions and inquiries. Shalom and stay blessed. Shalom. This is the Original Word Ministry. We believe in the original Bible doctrines. We believe in the true apostolic teachings. We believe in preaching the unadulterated Word of God to restore the bride to the original faith of the apostles. Remember, the Bible says, "My house shall be called the house of prayer." Come and pray your problems away. Remember, prayer breaks every chain. It opens the windows of heavens. Prayer brings deliverance and healing to the soul. Worship with us at the Original Word Ministry, opposite the Fountainhead University College, Community 12, Tema. We believe in the true apostolic teachings. We believe in preaching the unadulterated Word of God to restore the bride to the original faith of the apostles. Remember, the Bible says, "My house shall be called the house of prayer." Come and pray your problems away. Remember, prayer breaks every chain. It opens the windows of heavens. Prayer brings deliverance and healing to the soul. Worship with us at the Original Word Ministry, opposite the Fountainhead University College, Community 12.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's a misconception a lot of people have. It's a very common misconception, but that's the fact of the matter. People with autism are not mentally retarded.
Okay. So I have a question here, but before I read it out, those listening to us and those watching us, please, you can send in your questions and comments via the number 054-8490-753. 054-8490-753. You can equally call in if you have any questions or if you need any clarification on what we've been discussing so far. You can also send your comments in the comment section on the video on Facebook, and will gladly attend to you. Okay, so Prof, it's mental retardation hereditary?
Sometimes, yes. That is to say, mental retardation can be. Okay, let me put it like this: there is a genetic hereditary foundation for mental retardation.
Okay.
So, yes, sometimes it runs in families. So, for example, if an individual who's mentally retarded and another who is also have a child, most likely there's a likelihood of the child also having that. Okay, but then there's also, in fact, okay, fine. So there is a hereditary component to it. There's also a genetic component to it.
Okay.
Okay, so when you say hereditary, that's to say it's inherited, if you like, from your parents. But when you say it's genetic, that is to say, if you like, during the birth, during the conception pregnancy process, you know, when the child is being formed, if you like, sometimes things may go wrong, and that may also give rise to mental retardation. So, for instance, one of the most common causes of mental retardation is in fact, some of the most common causes. Number one, from a genetic viewpoint is can talk about alcohol consumption. Okay, one of the most common is something called fetal alcohol syndrome.
Okay.
So when a woman is expecting and she's a heavy consumer of alcohol, she puts the child at risk of being born mentally retarded.
Okay.
Another thing also is a history of sexually transmitted infections, if left untreated, gonorrhea and a few others. Okay, if a woman gets pregnant and she's having some of these things, it also increases the likelihood that the child will be born mentally retarded. Then also there are those purely genetic factors, things that happen not as a result of mommy's fault or daddy's fault, but they just happen.
Okay.
There's something called a trisomy. Okay, a trisomy is what happens, you know, during the process of conception. Okay, when mommy and daddy come together, the male is supposed the male is supposed to contribute 23 chromosomes. Okay, which are supposed to meet the female's eggs, which is also gonna have the 23 chromosomes. And what happens is, in biology, we have what we call meiosis and mitosis.
Yeah.
Okay, so these 23 chromosomes are supposed to pair up. So pair 1, pair 2, pair 3, pair 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, all the way down to 23. If you have the perfect chromosomal matching, there is no problem.
Okay.
But every now and then, an extra chromosome latches on to particular pairs, and depending on which pair it latches on, you may have different types of problems. The most common is when it latches on to the 21st pair, trisomy 21, and that is what gives rise to what is known as Down syndrome.
Okay.
Okay, and I'm sure you know what Down syndrome is. People sometimes refer to them as mongoloids. Okay, but that's not a word we encourage. They normally have the slanted eyes, thick tongues, short necks, and very short fingers.
And they always look the same.
Yes, they have a way of always looking the same. Yes, so that's trisomy 21. You also have another one called the Fragile X syndrome. Then we have trisomy 18 as well. So depending on which chromosomal pair it latches on, you may have different types of problems, but more often than not, it gives rise to mental retardation.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, please, before I ask my next question, I would like to acknowledge our listeners on Facebook. Some people have been sending comments and questions. Michael Entry said, "Hello, can a child retrogress with in terms of the IQ level? If so, what's the cause?"
Can a child retrogress? Okay, in other words, as the child is growing, do they start getting less and less smart? Yes, it can happen. And if that happens, that is one of the surest signs of mental retardation. But generally, it could also be due to some other retrogressive illness.
Okay.
Okay, so for instance, we used to have back in the day an illness called hebephrenia, which we don't normally talk about these days, but childhood schizophrenia. And I've already spoken about what schizophrenia is. So for example, you can have a child who's born normal and everything, but as they are going through school, during the early years, they are doing well, but if the child is schizophrenic, you realize that as they are advancing in school years, it looks like they are actually degenerating. They are actually getting worse and worse in the classroom. And sometimes when the child is having a problem with schizophrenia, it can be that. It could also happen when the child is having some other neurological disorders. It can also happen. And yes, even mental retardation. Remember, with mental retardation, as you get older, the signs become more profound. It becomes easier to see. So for instance, it's difficult to identify mental retardation in a 3-year-old.
Okay.
But by the time the child is, let's say, 10, 12, we can see it better.
Okay. Michael Entry, please. I hope you've been answered. Then we have Deborah Seth Nate. He's watching us live from WA UDS campus. Thank you for joining us. Okay. So back to my question. Are there medications used in treating mental retardation, or what can be done about it?
There are. Again, it depends on what the cause of the mental retardation is. So, for instance, if the child is suffering from Down syndrome, for instance, Down syndrome normally comes with what we call congenital birth defects.
Okay.
In other words, if a child is born with Down syndrome, in addition to the Down syndrome, they may have other illnesses, like they may have heart problems, problems with sterility, and all the rest. Now, what happens is, and this is why again you need to see the doctors. Okay. What happens is that depending on the other attendant issues, okay, if it's a congenital heart problem, surgery can treat that. If there's this particular problem, surgery can treat that. So generally they tend to have other problems that can be treated. Now with the retardation itself, generally speaking, again, it depends on if we've been able to identify certain causes. One of the things I forgot to speak about is lead poisoning, for instance. And let me give this warning. Especially in those parts of town where we break our dynamite a lot. You understand? Dynamite typically tends to contain lead. You realize sometimes children in those areas, they tend to lick the dirt. And the dirt has got high levels of lead content. And lead, when it accumulates in the brain, it clogs it up. So sometimes with some of those particular issues, if we're able to see them early, the doctors may treat those as medical conditions to deal with them. Okay, and so for all of these things, depending on the source or the cause of the retardation, that is what will inform the type of medical treatment. But generally, mental retardation is treated by psychologists in conjunction with doctors and other health practitioners.
Okay.
It's not treated by just one person. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you very much. Please, I would like to give the number out again for those who want to send in comments, contributions, and questions. You can text or WhatsApp on the number 054 8490753. I'll take it again, 054 8490753. And you can also send in your comments in the comment section in the live video on our Facebook page. Okay, so Prof, once again, I would want to ask if mental retardation can be prevented.
Can it be prevented?
Yeah.
Oh yes. Oh yes.
And
We
how?
you see, mental retardation is caused by several factors. We've spoken about biological and genetic, but I think the single most common cause of mental retardation is environmental. Let me say it as it is, and if somebody gets angry with me, I've said it. Poverty. Cause of mental retardation. You see, let's do a very quick rundown and see how it happens. Man and woman come together and a woman gets pregnant. What are the conditions of the pregnancy. Is the man healthy? Is the woman healthy? If yes, no problem. But if you have an unhealthy man with unhealthy eggs fertilizing a healthy woman, you're going to have problems. If you have an unhealthy woman, you're going to have problems. The woman gets pregnant, and then during the period of which she's carrying the baby, it's important that attention be paid to diet, nutrition, and her physical fitness. People get pregnant and they refuse to go to hospitals. Okay, and you know, and as a result of that, throughout the period they are carrying the pregnancy, they get all manner of illnesses. Sometimes you can get malaria if you're you and into the baby. So by the time you go and you treat your malaria, you are gone, but the baby is still dealing with his own. And he is not yet fully developed, so he doesn't have the same immune system capabilities as you have, and then they go attacking the child's central nervous system. So the child is born, and already by the time they are born, bam, permanent brain damage, mental retardation has been established. Or better yet, mommy is expecting and she is not eating healthy. And remember, everything the mother eats, that's what the baby eats. You understand? So it's important that when a woman is pregnant, she has to eat healthy. Please, not rich, healthy. There's a big difference. Healthy, not rich, healthy. Eat your foods. Then when the baby is born, let me establish this. Intelligence is set within the first 6 to 7 years of a child's development. First 6 to 7 years. What do I mean by that? The conditions of birth play a key role. Okay, if the child is well born and you know there were no dramatic illnesses during the pregnancy period, all goes well. But once the baby is born, during those first years, it's important that the baby is well. In Ghana today, the nurses encourage women, for instance, that there should be that exclusive breastfeeding at least for the first 6 months. Why? Because the mother's breast contains every nutrient that the child needs. It is important. We got to test the child for other illnesses, PKU and the rest. Make sure that as the child is growing, the child is also eating well. If the child eats well, because once they come out and then the development is going on, you have what we call neural specialization. Once the child is born, the cells of the brain, referred to them as neurons, now begin to start finding their respective roles. Those that are responsible for physical movement, those that are responsible for neurological, intellectual performance, everything begins to find their level. And during those 6 years, diet and nutrition is important. You got to avoid the child getting all manner of unnecessary diseases. Let me say this, in today's complex Accra life, a woman gives birth and she has to go back to work within a few days. So what does she do? She brings a very underaged house help from the village and leaves the child with this underaged house help. Okay? And when she's not around, she doesn't know what the house help does. She leaves the child falls down. Today, this part of the head hit the ground. And this part is responsible for visual information. The next day, this part of the head falls down. This part is responsible for short-term memory, language comprehension, and so forth. The next day, this part falls down. Long-term memory, social responses, ability to make judgments. All right. The next time, cow, they knock here. Every part of the brain has a role to play. You understand? So even who you leave your child with is important. It is not, and you don't give your child to just anybody. So if you do a fantastic job with all of these things, I have news for you. By age 7, if you've done a fantastic job and your child is of at least average IQ, it doesn't matter whether you send your child to GIS or Comtate number 1. The child should be able to do well in school and reach the potential that God wants them to reach. But if you make any of these mistakes during the first 6 to 7 years, you're putting the child at risk. That's it.
Okay. Yes, we have some comments on Facebook and I would like to read them out. Okay, this is from Pastor Shermantin. Shalom to Prof and Sister Pearl. I want to congratulate the team for the wonderful work and God bless you. Very wonderful
Amen.
topic.
Thank you, Pastor.
Okay, it's our only comment. And we thank all those who have joined us so far. And you can equally contribute to the program. You can send your comments, contributions, and questions to 054-8490-753, and you can equally call, or you send your comments and questions in the comment section on the live video on Facebook. Okay. So, Prof, let's continue with our topic. So, from all that I have learned personally, can we say that mental retardation, if not treated or managed, can become chronic?
Mental retardation, if not treated or managed, yes, it can become chronic. It can become serious. And mental retardation is as simple as this topic may be. Let me say this: it has a lot of relevance, especially for national development.
Okay.
It has a lot of relevance for what we call the gross national IQ.
Wow.
Everybody likes to admire the developed countries, like the US, the UK, and Europe, and all of these things. But what a lot of us do not fail to realize is that those countries have been able to go far because the individuals in the country have a certain level of intellect.
Okay.
Now, you realize when I was talking about retardation, I spoke about the mild. And the
Yes.
mildly retarded individual, I mean, they look like you and I. Okay, but how we take care, especially of our children, okay, like I've emphasized, and I want to emphasize this, during the first 7 years, let them eat right, let them sleep right, avoid all the unnecessary illnesses, do your homework. And if you get all of these things right, you're going to have a healthy child. But if you ignore it, yes, it can become chronic and it can become very, very bad. The good news also about mental retardation is that once it is seen early, it is easier to treat.
Okay.
Just because a child is diagnosed with mental retardation doesn't mean that automatically it is a life sentence. Okay, we have different programs for them that we can put in place, and so it helps. But if a society is only as good as the quality of people in it. So if we get to a point where we start developing quality individuals, you have a quality organization. You have quality individuals in a church, overall you're going to have a quality church. If you have quality individuals in a community, you have a quality community. And so individual by individual, we need to pay attention to that.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay, so what help or what can we do? Maybe if a child has mental retardation and maybe the parents probably don't know because they've not gone for diagnosis and stuff. Maybe after they've realized that their child has that, what can they do to boost the confidence of their children?
Let me say this. I think I start by saying, if a proper assessment is done, if you go see a proper professional and they do the assessment properly, as soon as the assessment is done, they should be able to help you to come up with a program. Okay, and let me say this: just because a child has been diagnosed mentally retarded, it doesn't mean they can't go to school. About 10-15 years ago, for instance, when a child is diagnosed with Down syndrome, automatically we believe that, oh, a child with Down syndrome can't go to school. Today it's not true. Kids with Down syndrome are finishing university and graduating. You see, and that's the good news. So you see, faith, optimism, okay, when you see the thing early, you plan for it. Okay, so it shouldn't be the case. And I also want to emphasize this: let us not be in a hurry to start labeling the children. Okay, if you suspect it, let the person look at it and tell you what can be done, and then from there we draw the program, and the child can be helped to meet their full potential. Unless, of course, it is the last two, like I said. As for the severe and profound, we give that to God, and like we said, as for God, there's nothing beyond him.
Yes.
I'm sitting here talking as a professional, but first and foremost as a Christian. If there's one thing I've learned, please do not put a limitation on his capabilities. But the rest, as human beings, oh, why not? We can work on it. So even if it's mildly or moderately, and you want the child to get to that level with the proper support and planning, it can be done. But for that to work, you need cooperation between the parents, the health practitioners, and the school.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, please. I would like to call out the number again. If you have any questions, contributions, and comments on what we've been talking about so far, reach us on 054-8490-753. And if you have any other issue you want more clarification on, you can still send us an SMS text or a WhatsApp on the same number, and you can also give us a call. So, Prof, you're back to my questions.